I think we're ready.
You ready?
You look good. The lighting's really good for you.
Lighting's good, is it? No greys? Shall we look in the camera or not?
I reckon look at me, but it doesn't matter. Yeah.
No, I'll be doing that then. I'll start from the top then. I've always sort of been one to sort of try and keep my options open, and then try and forge my path just based on what naturally interests me. And I think that started off at the time of university. I started off in comm law, and the law part just didn't gravitate to me. I just wasn't that interested in it. And in contrast, I really liked accounting and finance and economics, such to a point that I dropped the law aspect of it.
Oh, really?
With the flavour of keeping options open. It was third year. I still had another year of uni to go, but everyone in my accounting class was applying for Big Four accounting roles, and so I thought, well, I'll keep my options open and I'll just sort of go down that path. It was quite structured, even though we were in a small office down in Hobart. So there was the involvement of the Melbourne and Sydney recruiting teams, and it was very structured. But then the thing that I probably liked about that process was, being from a small office, it was very personable with the main partners. The interviewer will sort of be saying, we're looking for this rounded person, but of course, there is an element of the personable, the technical and those side of things. I think for each role, obviously, there's some which have, a natural bias to one of those areas or another. So I found for that particular role, that was really important, that sort of personable capability. I was still sort of 19 years old when I was going through that process, so I still felt, maybe not at the time, but looking back, it was very, very green.
Yeah.
And you sort of, you're trying to do as much research as you can about a role, and you sort of go through your university studies, and you can be very meticulous around how you prepare for that, but it's very difficult to actually know what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis and what it's sort of all about. There is that disconnect. You sort of go into those interviews and you say, I feel very prepared. I'm an accountant, I'm very prepared around the subject matter, and I can tell you about, this it's almost academic material, but at the end of the day, the partners there are sort of like, okay, well, we're actually task oriented and this is what your role is, and it's actually very different. Yeah. I've always had in the back of my mind that I'd love to have gotten into banking at some stage. So that's always sort of been loosely that sort of goal. But I haven't been too sort of rigid around saying, no, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do that at the expense of everything else. As long as I'm sort of trying to progress and trying to move forward in some sort of field, and as long as I can sort of see that there is a path ultimately to where I want to get to, then that was the objective. So I was sort of going through those initial years of my working professional life when GFC hit. And there were staff layoffs and recruiting freezes. Finally, the door sort of reopened, and I got the opportunity to transfer within the same office to a Melbourne role. And I think then, again, it's sort of taking that was sort of taking the next step, and then once I'm sort of in that position, I'm establishing myself there, thinking about the next few options and how I can then sort of go to the next step or the next role. And so that was, for me, trying to stay still within the same organisation, but going into a different team, going into a corporate finance team. And so again, that process, the door was sort of closed initially. There was no opportunity at that point in time, but it was again sort of thinking, well, continue to progress myself doing the accounting sort of based work, and then the door opened, and then sort of making the most of that, and then that was again the next sort of step, the next stage, and then I did that for sort of 3 or 4 years, and then exactly the same thing when looking for banking roles. So that was, I was sort of made the conscious decision that I wanted to sort of get into a banking gig, and again, the doors were sort of closed initially, and I was looking for Melbourne-based roles. and it was sort of tough going. Like, you're sort of looking for 6-7 months, and there's only a select number of shops that are out there, right?
Yeah.
So finally an opportunity opened up in Sydney, and here I am. I think it's about being a bit flexible. I might have wanted to go from an accounting role in a capital city, say in Melbourne, to a banking role. But I knew at that point in time, when I was sort of looking for that there just was no opportunity for someone with my skill set. So I thought, what's the next logical step? Well, there is a halfway house within an accounting house to sort of develop those skills to make yourself more attractive. So I think it's about being a little bit flexible, and I think it's just about being patient as well. Comparing it from the accounting, I was actually an auditor, worked in the audit, so that was the foundations around understanding how a set of financial statements are put together, and just understanding business as well, and the cycles within a business. So it's like a sales cycle, a purchases cycle, sort of from go to woe, and so that gave me good knowledge of the ins and outs of what made a business tick. Then going into a corporate finance role, there was certainly that element of understanding how the numbers actually work. But then it was a lot more around how a sale process would work for a business, and the transaction cycle. And I think the big difference between, say, a corporate finance role within a professional services firm and banking, I found was I think banking's probably more technical around the capital structure and about what sort of tranche of debt we have in and how we raise equity. In the professional services firm, it was probably a lot more sort of process driven around I'm going to go out, I'm going to speak to these smaller business owners about potentially running the sale process. I'm going to sort of, guide them through that process around getting marketing material ready, information memorandum, getting the data room ready, and sort of working through to close. They want you to succeed, they want you to be a good candidate, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out where your knowledge base ends. So ultimately, and this is from a technical front, ultimately what they're trying to do is push you until a point where you just don't know the answer, and then they sort of know, okay, then this is his universe of knowledge of that subject matter. They're not the enemy. It's just that they just need to they just need to establish that point and to understand really whether you're suitable for the role or not. A typical day is it's unplanned, and it's quite often it's just haphazard. So I sort of think about it in that sometimes I'll be in Excel with my calculator and trying to figure out where formulas are going, and you sort of, it's not hard math by any stretch, but it's just sort of that logic, trying to make sure that logically the forecast is sort of working, and then that sort of scoping study overview that's in PowerPoint, so it's in painting class, so to speak, with pretty colours and making things all sort of line up, and is it presented nicely, and writing, and then that final aspect of around the origination and thinking about what's happening in the market. That's more sort of practical, but also a bit of creativity. Will this be an interesting target for one of our clients, and how does that fit into them strategically? So I think that sort of sums up.
What's your biggest weakness?
Biggest weakness?
Yeah. Did you get that when you applied for this job?
I actually did.
You did?
And I said my biggest weakness was interviews.
It was interviews?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, no one laughed. And I wasn't, and I really wasn't prepared for the answer, and so it was quite awkward, actually, because I was sitting there on weakness number 2. Oh, it was 3 weaknesses I had to give them.
I said, what are your 3 weaknesses?
3 biggest weaknesses. I had to give 3. I mean, I think at times I find it difficult to know when to switch on and know when to switch off. And I think in a banking role, because you're there for so long, just in terms of physically being there for so long, that the hours are long, you need to be able to have that ability of, it's almost, and this is an analogy that my boss used, it's almost like playing in the slips in cricket.
Yeah.
So you're on when someone's bowling, and then you need to be off, stand up, sort of look around. And it's sort of like that in banking as well, because there are times when you need to be completely focused and know, okay, then I need to use all of my brain power for this certain task. And there's times when you're not coasting, but it's less intense.
Yeah.
And I think it's about, sometimes I find it difficult to do that sort of switch on, switch off. And I love sometimes people say, I'm too much of a hard worker.
Tell the camera something, you can do it.
Lay it down.
Yeah.